real quick, I want to do a land acknowledgement. For all folks living in Alaska with long histories here, we want to acknowledge their stewardship and care for their communities and their land. That should always be front of our minds as we're working in Arctic research. So thank you. Next, I will introduce the pillar leaders. We have Nicole Herman Mercer, who unfortunately can't make it today, Kena Ulokachakiak, and Liam Frink. And I'm going to pass it on to Liam, the federal co-lead of the pillar team.
Thanks so much, John. You just do such a great job for us, as does the IARPC Secretariat. We really appreciate the support and the work that you all do. Thank you. And Kena and I and Nicole couldn't make it today, but she really wished she could. But we're really just super excited, as Kena has shared in the chat, and to have the U.S. National Science Foundation here to help us think about the I have to read it. It's the PAPPG, which is the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. And in that guide, the 24-1 is changed to tribal approvals. And John, if you could have the next slides, please. Slide. And today we're really just really honored and happy to have two of the crafters of those. So some Caroline Blanco, who is with NSF and Tribal Liaison, Assistant General Counsel, Office of the General Counsel, U.S. NSF. And Jean Feldman, Head Policy Office, Division of Institution and Award Support, Office and Budget, Finance and Award Management with U.S. NSF. And so we want to welcome them. They are generously going to share with us some of the details, a little bit of the history, kind of the context of this change to the PAPPG, and what that means a little bit. And then we'll open it up for discussion. And both Caroline and Jean are just really terrific to speak with us about this. So we're really happy they joined us, and all of you as well. This is a change that has meaning, and it's meant to have meaning. And we're all here to try and figure it out together and make this work. So Caroline and Jean, I'll cede to you.
Thank you so much, Liam. And if we could have the next slide, please. One more. Thank you. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and we look forward to providing you with this contextual background and then opening it up to questions that we hope to be able to answer for you. This change in the PAPPG started back in 2021 when President Biden issued his memorandum on tribal consultation and strengthening nation-to-nation relationships. And it required all federal agencies, NSF being one of them, to consult with the federally recognized tribal nations and to develop an action plan for strengthening their relationships with federally recognized tribes. And there are 574 federally recognized tribes, and we had 90 days to do this in. So we got to work as quickly as we could. We held a director's town hall as a way of doing consultation, and had a lengthy comment period as well to find out what we could do better, and also had listening sessions. And the result of all of this was that we ended up developing an action plan of several things that we could do. If you could please, John, just hit the return. There's some more things that come up on this. Sorry about that, with an animation there. And we did end up filing a report with OMB at the White House in October of 2021, and we have since filed them annually after that. So the latest one that we have filed was October of last year. Okay. And next slide, please. What we did, and what we ended up doing, was forming within NSF a tribal consultation and engagement working group. I'm one of the two co-chairs. Germelina Tupas of our education directorate is also a co-chair, and Jean has been heavily involved in this working group as well. And what we did was we dedicated this group of folks to be able to address the action plan items and to see what we could do to really raise awareness within NSF and take some meaningful actions to improve our relationship and strengthen it with tribal nations. And so we ended up, you can see right here on the photograph there is of a virtual engagement room. And so this was a place where people could learn a little bit about how NSF touches on tribal interests and what sort of work we do, and then to go ahead and leave or have an opportunity for folks to leave comments to provide their thoughts on what they thought we could do. So we also ended up, as I said, conducting several listening sessions, about 6, I believe, and then we also attended tribal conferences. And back in 2023, we expanded our charge because we realized we have a lot of work to do, and we needed to keep the working group moving forward. So we expanded our charge to include non-federally recognized Indigenous communities. We increased our outreach efforts. We continue to attend conferences where mostly we would encounter tribal nation attendees. We established a centralized website for NSF tribal engagement, and the new PAPPG policy, which we will touch on. And that is a reflection of what we heard. And we developed a draft land acknowledgement statement. Next slide, please. So moving forward to what we heard, there were a couple of main takeaways that came from what we heard from tribes through the comment period and listening sessions and through our interactions with folks during conferences. One is that the biggest one probably is "nothing about us without us" was the quote that we heard. And this was about past tribal or past research practices that have harmed tribal nations. And, you know, things like publications that were produced following research that the tribes were represented in a certain way, and the tribes never had an opportunity to comment on those. And then those publications are out in the public domain, and then other publications are produced based on those primary publications. And again, the story from the tribe's perspective is not being told. And also we heard that federally recognized tribal nations do have interests and resources that they do feel are entitled to protection, and certainly in some of the legal constructs, they are indeed, from the federal perspective, also recognized as being entitled to protection. If you could hit return again, there's another, there we go, thank you. The other thing we heard is that really more engagement training is needed. Some people had no idea who NSF was. They thought it was the National, Sanitation
Foundation.
Foundation, yeah. And even if they knew who we were, they didn't know we were a federal agency. So we realized we had to do more outreach. Next slide, please. So we've done a whole host of things. I won't go through each one of these things. Some of them I've already mentioned, but this does go through some of the main things we've done. We visited tribal nations and other Indigenous communities. We're heavily involved with engagement with Native Hawaiians. In fact, just got back from another trip to reach out and try to learn more from the Hawaiian perspective and what they think their concerns are with regard to NSF's work. We've increased awareness with NSF through the conferences that we've attended. And the PAPPG language, of course, is pretty important. We think is one of the biggest deliverables we've come up with. And as I said, some of the other items I've mentioned here. And we also have started to produce training internally for NSF. And we had 2 90-minute training sessions so far that were very well attended. So the word is getting out both within NSF and outside, we're happy to say. Next slide, please. This is from the website that we created as well. So it is out there and live. Next slide, please. And this is where I would defer to my colleague, Jean.
Well, thank you, Caroline. And for those of you who aren't really familiar, we've thrown out the term PAP Guide a number of times already, and that really stands for the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. And it really is the backbone of NSF's policies and procedures for the assistance programs, meaning grants and cooperative agreements for the National Science Foundation. And unlike other agencies, it is a document that we issue annually and goes through an extensive public comment process. This particular provision of the PAP Guide was one of the most well commented on aspects of this particular PAP Guide that we put into place. So I wanted to give you a bit of background just on that aspect. And so what we always jokingly say, but in a serious way, true, that if there's something that you don't like of what NSF has done, don't worry, there's going to be an opportunity next year because we will be going through this process all over again. So as really was mentioned by very nicely in terms of contextual information by Caroline, the Biden administration issued Executive Order 14112 in December of 2023. And really in this executive order, the president reiterated his commitment to really protecting and supporting tribal sovereignty and self-determination, and really honoring our trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations. And one clip of this executive order that is really, really so important and really drove so much of where NSF ended on this issue was that it stated, we, the federal government, must respect tribal national sovereignty by better ensuring that they are able to make their own decisions about where and how to meet the needs of their communities. No less than for any other sovereign, tribal self-government is about the fundamental right of a people to determine their own destiny and to prosper and flourish on their own terms. And that, again, was so fundamental in all the decisions that the foundation made about where would we come out in terms of PAP Guide coverage. And so at the top of this slide is essentially the policy that we came out with, and it has been based on this year of work. And that work continues. I mean, we continue to listen, we continue to learn more, and we continue to know that this first year is going to have a bit of a rocky road. And we are acknowledging that to all of you right here and right now. But what the policy essentially says is that any proposal that may impact the resources or interests of a federally recognized American Indian or Alaska Native tribal nation will not be awarded by NSF without the prior written approval from the designated official or officials from the relevant tribe. And as Caroline mentioned, this was our first go at this. So it is at this point dedicated or has the parameter set at the 574 federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, but that we continue to discuss this within the foundation about what future steps we may take in terms of that applicability. So for purposes of the PAP Guide requirement, tribal resources include resources that are related to the land of a tribal nation. An easy example of that are natural resources that are located on the lands of a tribal nation. Tribal interests refer to aspects of a tribal nation that are considered by that tribal nation to be really representative of who they are or their way of life, such as tribal language or subsistence rights on tribal lands. Think of it as something that is unique to that tribe or within that tribe's domain. And as Caroline has mentioned, what we've heard over and over again is nothing about us without us. So if a researcher seeks to draw conclusions about a cultural practice of a particular tribal nation, that certainly would be in the interests of that tribal nation, because it could potentially impact how that tribal nation is represented in either publications, speeches, etc. And they should have a right as that tribal nation to be able to sign off on that before it goes into effect. And so it is for that reason that we impose this requirement that in that particular interest, the researcher would need to seek the approval of the potentially impacted tribal nation before NSF would fund that research. So we imposed as part of this process, a process of how this would work. And there's already, literally, it went into effect last Monday. Any proposals submitted are due on or after May 20, 2024. And there's already folklore about what we've done here and how this process works. And some of that folklore is that we can't even submit a proposal to NSF unless we've already contacted that tribe. And that's just not the case. So let me walk through what actually does take place and what this process actually is. So every proposal to NSF is submitted electronically. It's submitted electronically via a system called research.gov. And there's also another system called grants.gov, but it is rarely used by proposers to NSF. And there is now a new box on the cover sheet that's called potential impacts on tribal nations. And if there is, the proposal may impact that, the proposer would check that box on the cover sheet. And then proposers seeking funding for those proposals must provide at least one of the following at the time of proposal submission. And it's very, 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 very likely that it be the first one. A copy of the written request to the tribal nation for the activities that require review and approval. So we have in this research.gov a system that automatically compliance checks whether there's something attached to that proposal. And most typically, it would be that copy of that written request. And then prior to award, we would need to see one or two things. A written confirmation from the tribe that says, hey, we've reviewed it and we really don't even think review and approval is required. And that would be uploaded and would meet the intent of the NSF requirements. Or alternatively, they could provide the document that provides that requisite approval. So again, at the time of submission, you provide the copy of the written request, and then prior to a funding recommendation, we would need to see either that review and approval is not required or written documentation that provides that approval. Next slide, please. So there are a number of FAQs, and also I should mention that this is language that, as I mentioned, is just in time, but we also included within the PAC guide language some examples of what we did consider to be falling within the purview. And so I can certainly let you read that at your leisure, or certainly if you have any questions, Caroline and I would certainly be happy to answer those at the end. But we'd like to go through a few of these to frequently asked questions on kinds of things that we are absolutely already hearing. And we'd like to go through those to just kind of put some parameters around what we're hearing. And so Caroline and I will kind of tag team this part of it. But certainly, in whose responsibility is it to ensure that the correct tribal nation, individual, or entity has responded to a PI's request for approval? Well, that's clear to us. The bottom line is that it is the proposer's responsibility to ensure that the correct tribal nation, individual, or entity has responded to a PI's request for approval. And what we have done, we used a term that you may not be familiar with, the PAM, or the Proposal and Award Manual. And that is an internal compendium of guidance that we provide that supplements for our program staff what is already existing in the PAP guide coverage. And we've made it very clear that there may be questions where a researcher goes, I am doing research with X tribe. I have no idea where to go. Well, we have links to the BOI website that at least gives you a starting place, and they may have or will be able to tell you, if it is not them themselves, an individual within their tribe that the proposer and or the PI would be working with. We've also learned a lot about the fact that many institutions of higher education that are located within states that have tribes have a lot of experience in dealing with those tribes. And so it is very possible, or a tribal office within their institution. So that organization also may be very greatly involved in this process. Will NSF develop a listing of what constitutes tribal nation interests or resources? And on some of these, I really want Caroline's expertise in this space is just mind-boggling. She has been at the forefront of working to push the foundation in the right direction on this issue, and she really should be commended about all her hard work. But I would simply point out that on the second question, no, we can't develop a listing. There are 574 federally recognized tribes, and it really is a responsibility of the tribal nation. They are a sovereign nation to determine whether it impacts, and we certainly would not be able, and certainly would be inappropriate for NSF to put out such a list, because it is up to that tribe to determine what's an interest or resource. Caroline, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jean. And you know, this is really such an important point here, that NSF does not want to speak for the tribes. And this is the point that Jean has so well pointed out in her presentation. And this is what really is at the core of the language change in our efforts that we've been trying to make. So the other thing is, you know, as Jean said too, we did provide some examples. One important one that has come up is that this really refers to land. You know,
yes.
It's not out in the ocean. We think that still needs some work to develop to figure out how exactly we could include that area as well. So we thought we've got to start somewhere. And the alternative of doing nothing was unacceptable. So we wanted to start somewhere, and this is where we started. So we're not including oceans at this point, and marine areas, but really things that are either on land or something that is unique to a tribal nation, like their language. Anything that has the potential for a researcher to speak on a tribe's behalf is something we want to be sure that the tribe is the one determining whether that is okay or not. So that's pretty much what I wanted to make sure we covered there. Then on the next one, is there a recommended or required process for tribal nations to review or provide or deny approval of a research request? Jean, is that something you would want to take on for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see a theme in how we respond to a number of these. Let me give you an example. So we were at navigating the new Arctic, and there was a very basic question about not even just process. Why can't you just give us a form? We use that form, and then we could give that form and we fill it out. We all know what are the required elements. We follow those required elements and we submit it to the tribe. And don't you think that would be great? And our answer was absolutely not. It's not great. It's not great because these are sovereign nations. okay? These tribes are sovereign nations. And it would be like coming to the US and saying, I want to do research in the US. You got a form, but we don't really like that form. We'd like to use our own. No, they're sovereign nations, and the sovereign nation must determine what is the process, what kinds of information that they need or will help make them make the necessary determinations. And so it just simply, from our perspective, would be totally inappropriate for NSF to dictate what a tribe needs in order to make such a determination. I do think, Caroline, you are in the best position to answer question 4. I think we've covered pieces of it, but take question 4.
Okay, thank you. This question refers to whether non-federally recognized Indigenous communities are covered by this new language. And when Jean covered it, the answer is no, they're not at this time. Mm-hmm. And so we continue to look at ways, and then one of these, the same question was raised in the chat, and I did answer it. And the reason why we didn't include them at this point is because there are a lot of things we need to work out. For example, with the Native Hawaiian communities, the issue there that we struggle with is who represents them and who would we go to get permission. There are some potential pathways that we can explore. In fact, I had a meeting just last week with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and there are some pathways, as I said, that we are going to explore. We have not said we're never going to do this. We would like to very much include non-federally recognized Indigenous communities, but we have to figure out a way with those respective Indigenous communities on what would make the most sense. We don't want to be the ones to say, oh, this is the person or the entity that can grant permission. That's not for us to say again. We don't want to put ourselves in the shoes of the tribe. We want to be sure that we're hearing from them who they think the authority is that can grant that permission or deny it. So for the time being, that is not where we are at. But we are still looking at it. We'd welcome any thoughts that folks might have because we would like to include them. Next question is about a timeline for obtaining that approval. And Jean?
Yeah, we have heard a lot about this particular question, and really from another perspective of, in addition to this, the question of, well, I have to get in a proposal. I want an award, so it's going to hold up my award until I get this approval. That could take a lot of time. And the bottom line is, that's why I think you heard me mention that this may be a bit of a rocky road in the beginning. There isn't a timeline. This is up to each nation, sovereign nation, to make this determination. We've had a lot of questions about what kind of support that the National Science Foundation is willing to provide to the tribes to make this happen. Well, that's not something that's really in our purview, but what can be done is that the tribe can impose a permit fee. And that would be an allowable cost and on an NSF proposal, just like any other permit fee. And so we understand that the amount of time may vary. We also have situations where we have researchers who are very, very, very used to dealing with the tribes, and that they have well-established relationships with the tribes. And we suspect that their time frame may be very different because they know the process, they know who to go to, they know and may have already have some form of written arrangement with the tribe already in place. So that may occur very quickly. But if it is a new institution that has never dealt with tribes in the past, it may take them more time. If it's a tribe that has never dealt with the National Science Foundation before, it may take more time. But that timing is not going to make NSF say, okay, it's taking too long, we'll just proceed without the approval. That's just not something, at least, that we have made the determination to do at this time. Caroline, would you like to add to that?
No, I think that that covers everything. I would as well, Jean. It's very good.
So how will an NSF program officer know whether the signatory is designated official? We are certainly not going to be going back to the tribe. I mean, obviously, we would expect something that had the tribe's name on it, and but we do not expect. The only thing a tribal an NSF program officer may do is if they have direct experience working with that tribe and they see that it doesn't reflect, they may go and question it, but that would be unusual rather than a normal scenario. One other thing that I'd like to mention that's not in these slides is that there is always the possibility that someone could submit a proposal that did impact the interests or resources of a tribe and not check the box. And the program officer is reviewing this and saying, oh, whoa, I really do think that there could be the potential that tribal interests or resources are impacted, and they certainly, it is within their purview, either during the review process, formal external review process, or afterward, to go back to that proposer and say, hey, we do believe that that box should have been checked, and require that proposer to go through the official process. Caroline, anything to add to that?
I think just to, to add a little bit more, if it is the same situation where if anything else seemed to not be right, they could raise that with the program officer, or if a tribe found out about it and said, wait a minute, you really should have notified, or they should have gotten our permission, we would step in, and at that point we would look into it. And if need be, they would reach out to me as the tribal liaison, and I'd try to see what I could work through, and that would be the approach we take. But it's not as though NSF is going to be, the program officers are going to be the police on this. But the goal of this is really to encourage that relationship building between the PI community and the tribal nations.
We also understand that there are post-award implications to this. I mean, we are learning so much. I mean, not only, I mean, up until last year, tribal nations were not even included under eligibility in the PAP guide. And so you will see that as each year goes on, we will be adding more and more coverage, as well as more and more FAQs based on the questions that you and others, as I see them fly by on my right in the chat. So we've also been asked the question, hey, the tribal councils sometimes have 3-year terms, and they may approve something, and then their term ends, and then the next council no longer feels the same way or sees something differently. So there are all kinds of scenarios where engagement with Caroline and NSF program staff may even be necessary after an award is made.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up, Jean, about the changes in who is in charge of the governance structure of a particular tribal nation. And we've been asked what happens if the next tribal chairperson withdraws consent or approval, and we'd say that's up to them. That is their sovereign again, and if that's what they choose to do, that's what they choose to do. So that is important. And one more issue that, and we touched on this a bit, but talking about the heavy burden that some folks feel that this would place on a tribal nation, they're concerned that maybe this would be it. And we just want to emphasize that, as Jean pointed out, really is it is up to the tribal nation to determine the terms and conditions of granting approval. If they want to grant approval, they can say, as she pointed out on the timeline, it is their own timeline. If they want to charge fees, they can do that. You know, it's up to the tribe to figure out how to ease that burden in as best a way possible for, you know, for their needs. So wanted to be sure that we emphasize that as well.
Great. Well, if it's okay, Caroline and Jean, we really appreciate this overview. This has just been terrific. There's been a ton of chat questions.
Yeah, I know.
We want to open this up because our you know, we're really serving the communities here and really getting access to some questions. So I'll cede to my colleague Kena Ulakachakiak, and she'll be monitoring the questions, and I'll jump in every once in a while if you want, Kena, with chat, but you go for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for the questions in the chat. I'm going to synthesize a couple of them that I saw. So there was asked about, there was a reference to subsistence that was being talked about earlier, and then thinking about that oceans at the same time, oceans are not included. This is land-based, and as well as ice, when those are natural extensions and concerns of tribal communities, especially related to subsistence. And also someone else was saying, yeah, and wondering whether or not, you know, shipboard research should be included, especially, you know, if there's sounds that affect whaling and also walrus communities. So what say you?
I think that if it's okay, Jean, I'll jump in on this one.
Oh yeah, no, go right ahead.
So the subsistence rights are separate if they're, you know, subsistence rights in terms of, you know, whaling or activities that occur in the marine environment. Those, again, because of the concerns we had about, you know, we weren't prepared to really work through the issues in the marine environment. We didn't include them at this point. That being said, every other legal authority that is out there that already protects subsistence rights through treaty and other marine mammal issues that are under protection, Marine Mammal Protection Act and so forth, those authorities are unchanged by this PAPPG language. So those would still continue to go forth and protect those species and whatever subsistence rights happen to be applicable.
I can also tell you we received a lot of internal comments, particularly from our Geosciences Directorate, when we put out the initial draft. And it was very clear that they had major concerns, that there were issues that had not yet been considered effectively. And we felt very strongly that we wanted what we put out first would be our first iteration of this, but that as each year goes on, we will be supplementing with these discussions, with what we're hearing, and clearly oceans, ice, this full range of issues is an area that will need to be addressed.
Thank you. So as a follow-up to this, but just a little bit slightly different, is there's a question about drone, airplanes, satellite-based research, which is a lot of things happening up in the Arctic and can affect, like, crosses tribal lands, federal lands and state lands, especially in Alaska, and can affect like caribou migration and, you know, multiple tribal entities. So that, so the PI might not actually step foot on the land. So what about in those situations where people aren't physically entering the land, but the impacts can exist upon the land?
Well, I think, I mean, these are really fascinating questions.
They are.
Things that, you know, as we learn, we have to address. I mean, I definitely see the point of if a drone were to fly by and influence migration patterns and things like that, that could arguably be a situation where they'd have to get permission from the tribe. It might be something that we'd have to enter into a discussion with. And you know, again, I think that is a good reason for the PI community to work hard to develop a relationship. And if that relationship were there, then they might understand that maybe some methodologies being used might have an adverse impact, and they would have to go forward and address that.
And we
So
would certainly love to hear the input from this community. It's certainly not something that we can guarantee. We as federal agencies can never do that, but we would love recommendations that you may have on what needs to be covered that's not covered and how we might address that. We would love that input and greatly appreciate it.
Thanks. And so the recommendation is just thinking expansively about what potential impacts could be, and and thinking forward thinking, really to maintain good relationships with tribes that in the future. I love that. Thank you. So back to land. Again, another question. I'm going to put a couple of them together, but there was a question about if there is guidance for situations when one tribal nation approves and the research, but others do not, especially as like things that might cross different tribal lands, or they might be neighboring tribes that have resources that they share together. And then, you know, further like complicated by Alaska, where tribal nations have, a lot of them have ceded, I guess, their land to their Alaska Native Corporation.
Yes, we heard about those.
Yeah, and so that and so the issues of who controls the land and whose land is what is quite complicated. So how might we navigate those issues effectively and equitably?
That is a challenge. I think that let me see if I can recall back the first part of your question about just in general, if one tribal nation approves and another one does not, and they may both have resources, you know, we look at it as the researcher would have to get approval from all impacted tribal nations.
If they wanted to go on that land and did not have approval, we would not fund that proposal. So unless there was a revision to that proposal that limited the scope of work to only the approved land, we would simply not approve a scope that included land that the tribe just said, no, we don't agree with that.
Right.
So evolving.
Yes. Yes.
That's what's lovely about revisions, right? And as we learn more, we get better and get closer to the target. Thank you so much for those answers. Okay, another question is, how much training will program officers be receiving about tribal lands, resources, and interests in order to help field these spot issues?
Right. Right.
One of the things that we have been doing is we recognize that we need to raise awareness both inside NSF and outside. And so within NSF, what we have been doing is making leadership aware of these issues. Jean and I have done, and Jean has done far more than I have, of, you know, PAPPG updates to raise awareness. It seems like we're on the lecture circuit these days, you know, going around within NSF to the different directorates to try to raise awareness on this. So to some extent, that has been a helpful way of approaching it. And as I said, we did develop training, a 90-minute training for this, for program officers. And I think the first one was attended by at least 50 program officers, somewhere around there. Yeah. And the second one was also pretty well attended. And then we're recording it and making that available for program officers to see in the future. But I mean, our work hasn't ended by any stretch. And we're actually scheduled to address the senior leadership of NSF, the heads of the directorates, both the head and the deputy assistant directors, and office heads at the end of June. And so we'll be addressing this issue as well. So we are continually making, you know, efforts to raise awareness.
We also are focusing, in addition to those many training sessions that we've already discussed, we've made it very clear that if a particular division or directorate has particular needs and interests, obviously our geosciences directorate has been very, very interested in this issue. And we are willing and have gone to directorate meetings. We just today received a request from NSF's newest directorate, Technology, Innovation, and Partnership, who has a new program that engages with tribal nations. And they said, would you be willing to come and talk to us? And I said, absolutely. And we're setting up that time as we speak. So we are on the circuit, so to speak. We'll continue to do it until we get this where more people have, as many people as possible have at least been exposed to this training.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that the training is continuous. Another question, just rapid firing you. So, okay, thinking about NSF and research summaries, Liam answered this a little bit in the chat, but they're asking whether or not summaries of research are approved, besides this like basic summaries of like all the federal approved, but ways that tribes can maybe geolocate where research is being done and which tribal nation has given approval, so they can make sure, you know, if there's a way for them to be able to do some sort of checking to make sure they weren't missed in areas. So that might be a suggestion, but and
it doesn't exist now.
Yeah.
But Liam, any comments on that? As someone who has a lot of this under their.
Well, and the way I think this is a really great question, and I think it's really something for us to think about, kind of how to think about this. But generally what we can do, you know, we're limited by what we can do. So NSF awards, when they are awarded, are made public.
Yeah.
So you can, and I put in the link in there, you can search anything. So you could search your area, your community to see what pops up. And these go through time, so you can see what's happening. That beyond that, I'm not quite sure what else. I think as a program director, we do need to understand kind of what would lead this into this direction of whether it's Indigenous resources, right? I think that is a space in which there's going to be quite a bit of learning. And I really trust Caroline and Jean and kind of the process at NSF that we'll get better with this, and we'll make sure that we are being ethical stewards of this PAPPG change, because it's very important to us.
But it keeps evolving, and we love the suggestions. Like Liam said, sometimes we're going to have to think about them a bit more. There are some ways even within our current website to search for information, but it's not exactly what you're talking about. But we'd have to think about it a bit more. But love the suggestions, so keep them coming.
Awesome. Okay, here's a question that's practical. Will comments in this webinar be considered official input by NSF, or is there a specific form in which people need to comment?
Oh, go ahead, Jean.
Well, first of all, we're listening right now. So we're getting comments right now. Every time we go out, we get more comments. We do have, as a federal agency, though, an official process that we have to follow. And it is publishing it in the Federal Register. And yes, we did hear from folks in Alaska and even a few tribes in Alaska on our language. So folks did see it. So that is the official, but it doesn't just end with that process. With every speech we go out and give, we get input like you're giving us as we speak. Caroline, add more, because I could tell you wanted to say some things too.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah, I think the concept behind it is if you've got a formal comment period that allows equal opportunity for everybody to comment during a specified time, and that creates a federal record. And that is what the agency formally considers. But Jean's absolutely right that, you know, through these conversations as well, You know, that's informal input, not formal input.
Yeah, it's not formal.
Right. And it does, though, have a real meaning to us in that we still have our tribal consultation and engagement working group meetings. And if things come up, we can discuss them. And
I'm laughing because somebody quoted what we said about coming to Alaska at a meeting. So we better be careful what we say, because clearly you all are really listening to us.
I love it. Okay, one last question. So back to practicalities. So is this like something that is going to be part of annual reporting? When it comes to like how this, like if tribes want to revoke their approval or just all that different stuff, like is it during the annual reporting time that shifts can happen, or how is this included in annual reporting?
Well, certainly they have, there is an obligation in any annual report. We have several sections of the annual report. But and certainly any interactions they would be having, they would be describing it in terms of the collaboration section as part of that. But I would not want folks to really leave this feeling like that was the only time. If there is ever an issue, that can be raised. NSF program officer, NSF grants officials, that is absolute. It's not just a one time and, oh, you missed it. We're going to have to wait for another year. And we have a major concern with the researcher that is on our land and what they are doing. We don't want to give that impression, because that's not the case at all.
Thank you. Well, I want to make sure that we have time to say thank you to you both. But I also want to acknowledge that in the chat, there's still more questions. There's comments, I see. So we will save the chat for you and email it to you so you have a copy of it. But anyways, I'll hand it back to Liam and to do the thank yous.
Thanks so much, Kena. And I really, Jean and Caroline, thank you so much for meeting with us. And folks, if you have questions, you can email Caroline directly, correct, Caroline?
Sure.
About this. They're both very receptive, and trust us, we'll be doing more of a circuit in Alaska, both virtually and live. So really making an effort to do that in the near future. So some of you will be hearing from us. And I think we're done. John, would you like to? And Kena, thank you so much for moderating. I'm really proud of the work that IARPC and our Participatory Research and Indigenous-led research group does. So I really appreciate Jean and Caroline, you supporting that, and the IARPC secretary. So
and we were happy to come. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jean. John?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Pillar co-leads. And thank you, everyone who attended. And we really appreciate your questions. We'll be sure to save these and submit them. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
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 Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you.